Welcome to the Elevate Your Call to Service podcast. Here we provide tips, tools, and resources to help law enforcement officers succeed at work and in life. I'm your host, Michael McIntosh, retired sheriff and current bureau chief in the Denver metro area. We have a full house here today to talk about training in modern times. Traditional training techniques are not as effective with younger generations. We'll talk about the reasons why and how to shift our approach in our training programs. I'm here with Dr. Alex Kondos, Dustin Schutt, and Casey Overton. Alex is a 22-year veteran of law enforcement. His focus is on SWAT and training in the Denver metro area. Dustin is a former law enforcement officer with a decade of experience in patrol and K-9. He's an entrepreneur currently serving his community as a contractor. Casey has 20 years experience in law enforcement and is currently a detective commander in the Denver metro area. Well, thanks for joining me this morning. I really wanted to kind of start diving into what it looks like with training this new generation. We've heard for many years as we've been in law enforcement, with each generation, there are different types and different techniques that we really need to make sure that we're very aware of in our training programs. And what I really wanted to talk about this morning was specifically in our FTO program. I think that most of us for years are very familiar with the San Jose model. So there's this standard FTO program, and then there's also a PTO program. And I know that in law enforcement, we always want to make sure that in the training programs, in the field training programs, that we're very aware and ensure that we are teaching them what they need to know so that they're prepared for the community that they're serving. But one of the things that I think that we lose sight of is the different types of techniques that we need to incorporate into our training program based upon the generation or the type of trainee that we're getting. Alex, I know that you are currently in charge of an FTO program in your agency. What are you guys seeing? What are you doing in your program to make sure that we're meeting the needs not only of the agency but also of the trainee that we're training?
So yeah, it's definitely a different generation that's coming to this job right now. I don't even know we're in generation X, Y, Z, Q. At this point, who knows? Along with, we're also coupled with a just lack of interest in getting into the law enforcement profession. Anyway, there's not an agency out there who's fully staffed, who is having people bang down the door to come work there. In fact, it's pretty much the opposite. We're struggling to find recruits and find people in the first place that even want to be officers anymore. So part of that generation, issue is that interest in being an officer in the first place. I mean, we were all brought up, we're all from older generations where just certain values were instilled in us. Just that natural respect we had for law enforcement or military or anything. It was a yes sir, no sir if you were contacted, no matter what. And just societally anyway, we're seeing that shift where it's almost being taught to have a disrespect for the police and not have that same kind of reactions like we used to have, that same just natural respect. But that's also the generation we're trying to pull officers from when it comes to things like that. So as we're getting the folks of this newer generation in our ranks, what we're seeing is not only is their mindset completely different, but it's just how they learn in general. We were outside with stick as a toy gun, outside all day, had to get dragged back inside the house, to now they're growing up in the new generations where it's all electronics or TV or your iPads or your iPhones, where you don't go hang out with your friends. You get in chat groups and you don't see them for the whole summer because you're in a chat group with them or talking to them on a video game or things like that. And now we're trying to get these folks from this generation into a job that, while technology has changed and the legislation has changed, and restrictions have changed in what we do, the ultimate job hasn't changed that much since the dawn of policing. It's still good guy goes, finds the bad guy, puts him in jail. sends them off to a court process. Well, it's changed some in there. The whole aspect of it really hasn't, to a certain degree. So as we're getting this generation in there, we're trying to change sort of how we teach, but we're also at the same time ending up dropping, I think, our standards and expectations to try to get these people on board and try to get them through training programs and try to get them on our forces. So where we would have expected, well, I don't think when any of us got hired, there was, what you have to, even your drug expectations was 3 to 5 years you even looked at marijuana, you weren't getting hired. And even if you had ever done a hard drug, you just weren't going to get hired, period. Versus now, you look at it and it's, would you stop smoking marijuana if you get hired? That's where we're at right now. So with all those things and all those changes and the way we end up bringing in here, we're having to drop our standards. It's no longer the standards of this, and this coming in. But we seem to have, and generalized, kind of bastardized our training programs on what we're making our trainees do as they've come in because of their different mindsets, because of their other things. I've seen a lot of places, I know when we went through an academy, there were fights you went through. Your bags, your scenarios, you'd have to get punched, you'd have to get in a fight, you'd have to wrestle around. And nowadays, they're just not doing that. It's just, well, we can't do a 3-minute fight with this person. We don't want to hurt them. We don't want to hurt their feelings. We don't want to be too hard on them. And the problem is we're creating an officer that has that mindset where everything's a little softer. Their expectations to have, I want a timeout card. My feelings are hurt, these things. And, we're then putting that out there and expecting them to go after the same bad guys who didn't get softer, who didn't change, who still want to kill you, and they don't really care what generation you're from when they are going to, at the end of the day, kill you to get their freedom, if that's the case.
Yeah, and I would say probably even more violent today when it comes to our bad guys than it was, when I worked the streets in the 90s. It was violent then. And there was a lot of gang activity then, but the quickness of a suspect to go to a firearm almost immediately anymore is just, it's like it has progressed into something that I've never experienced before at this level in my law enforcement career. And it goes back to we have to make sure that we are training our officers to be prepared for that. And one of the things that you mentioned, Alex, was the electronics or the video games, and I think that the video games that a lot of the younger generation has played and are coming into the workplace with kind of having that knowledge. And really desensitizing not only those that are in our community, but even our law enforcement officers. The difficult part is getting them in that mindset that this is not a game, that this is for real, this is life, and I've seen some instances out there where officers get involved in that, and I don't think that they really realized the effect that was going to have on them in real life, as opposed to the life that they'd experienced growing up and playing video games.
Well, yeah, sure, it's definitely it desensitizes them from the violence and the things like that, but I mean, to a certain degree, it just desensitizes them. Not even violent video games, it's all electronics, everything is that human contact and empathy you get. I mean, we all say we all got into the job to help society and do all these things, and we have that human contact that we were able to bring, because when we went to a call from our generation, you were used to dealing with people growing up the whole time. So you had that empathy just built in because you're used to dealing with people one-on-one and things like that. And it's trying to flip that switch in folks who haven't really seen this, and they're desensitized just to I think having that empathy that comes across when they're talking to that, person that has that issue that they've called the police to deal with in their lives, it's they come across very cold almost sometimes. They just don't have that natural empathy from dealing with stuff. And it's a matter of teaching this generation how to do the job and understanding how they learn, because there's also a lot of good things that come from the electronics and the games and stuff. There is good critical thinking that they have doing these kind of things that gets built up in their minds, that us with a stick was all imagination. There's a lot of puzzles involved and things how to do this, trying to take this and translate it from doing it in a box to bring it into the real world with their job. And I think a lot of those approaches have to do with understanding that we have to adapt the way we teach, but we can't necessarily drop the expectations of what we expect them to do.
Yeah, it's those standards that we have, they still have to be met. There are still expectations, there are still standards that we in law enforcement must make sure that our officers and our deputies are taken care of on a daily basis during the course of their duty. What Casey, I know that you run investigators, detectives, and we're always hurting for personnel, and I know that in a lot of organizations, investigations can have some turnover. There's usually some investigators that have a lot of experience, but anymore that's just 2 or 3, and we've got a lot of new officers and deputies that are coming into investigations for the first time, and you've got to put them through an FTO program and really train them. But what are you seeing that's different today than it was when you first got into investigations, as far as the needs for the deputy or the new investigator and the needs of the agency?
Tenure is the big thing. And I think patrol officers and jail officers are facing the same thing. When I started in detectives as a detective, we had guys with a lot of experience, 18 years, on the job. And now my senior detectives are 2 or 3 years as a detective. So it's that built-in training system that continues after the FTO program, the mentorship and things like that is lacking. And Alex kind of touched on it with not being able to get people aren't knocking on our doors to get a job with police, and so we lower the standards in the training because we don't have the option but to keep them in the program to fully staff our agencies. And so when those people pass through an FTO program on patrol, substandard possibly, it takes them longer to get to a point where they're going to be successful as a patrolman. And then by the time they're just getting that part of the job down, they're already thinking of advancement, and they're thinking, okay, I want to go to detectives now. I kind of understand this, where I feel like in our generation, because we had such senior guys helping us out all the way through, by the time we were out of the FTO program, we were still in a training program with our senior guys. And they helped us advance a lot quicker. And so by the time we were tested for detectives and coming up, to investigations, we were kind of through a training process all the way through. And now we're relying on that mentorship is maybe a year difference of experience. And when they come to detectives, their year difference in our case is 3 years. And it takes a long time to be able to understand the differences of investigations between property crimes and homicide. And there's just a whole bunch of court proceedings and court rules that we have to follow that you just don't know right away. And not having those tenured guys with 15 years of experience is really handicapping us.
Yeah, I think Casey's dead on there where it's a follow-on, right? Like your best detectives were usually really good patrol cops because they learned the job. They knew what they were doing by the time because they went through a very stringent or definitely more in-depth training program where, let's face it, we all know where we stood as a trainee, right? You were the bottom of the barrel. And not only were you the bottom of the barrel, it was made clear to you that you were the bottom of the totem pole, that there was dirt and you were just under dirt. We can't even do that with the people we have coming in now. You know, if you say that to them, they're going to shut down. They're not going to respond well to that kind of thing. And that's where we get that balance where we have to do the same things, right? We have to expect that they need to do this paperwork a certain way. We need to make sure they know that there's these guidelines for a pursuit, for a use of force and things like that. We just have to present it in a different way. And that's one of the big things is being willing to presenting it in a different way, but understanding that and making sure you get across that this is still the things you need to do for this job. These are the things we are expecting out of you, and we have to be willing to accept that if they're not going up to those standards and they're not doing what they're supposed to do we really need the body that bad? We have to be willing to cut the ties because we know we're all short. We're all working short in every division in the jail, patrol, and every agency. But when we have 3 people on a shift that are somewhat good, how much more as a sergeant did you get mentored by your supervisor? And they were able to teach you things and do that. Well, now when they have 10 folks who all are lacking, how much attention can they give to each person? And that trickles all the way up, because then when we were a 2-year cop, we were a lot better trained than a 2-year cop now. And as they're going to become a detective or whatever they're moving on to, I mean, all the other specialized units, becoming supervisors and stuff, they're never ready to do their job in the first place. And now you then have detectives who were never really there all the way in the first place, who are becoming the detectives, or supervisors that are becoming supervisors that were never really quite there. And they don't know quite what they're doing, and now they're teaching the next generation poorly, and it's just going to keep trickling and trickling until we just find a cutoff where we go, all right, we need bodies, but what are we going to accept as our absolute minimum standard, and what standard do we need to be successful as an agency? And it's going to be different for every agency. It's going to be different for each agency what they need to be successful with other programs they have in place. But whatever that standard is, we need to set it and identify what you need out of your officers, and just be willing to not drop that standard of what we absolutely need.
Yeah, I don't think the community looks at it from the lens of filling bodies to respond to what they need. They want the best possible response that they can get in their time of crisis. And if you're filling bodies, not holding expectations, you may be presenting an officer safety thing. You know, you could be helping officer safety because you have more response, or you could be undermining it because that one person that is filling a spot isn't capable of being safe, or is a distraction to the officers. And I think from the community perspective, they don't really care about the amount of bodies that are there. They care about the type of response. And to Alex's point, it's more about quality than quantity. Obviously, when you're on a chaotic scene, you want all the cops you can have to control that. But I think with what Alex is saying is it's more about the quality, getting the good training, the mentorship. We've all been with the crusty old senior guy that did not necessarily want to be an FTO, but taught us some of the most valuable lessons of being a cop that you received, and it was after FTO. Is that mentorship really there if they don't respect you from the early stages of your career? Or are we potentially setting up a generation of law enforcement for failure without proper training.
Well, Dustin, I think you bring up a great point in that when somebody picks up the phone, they call 911. They to your point have an expectation that the person that responds is going to know what their role is and what their job is as a law enforcement officer. And it's our job as leaders in an organization, or those that are running FTO programs or training programs, to make sure that the community receives what it is that they expect. And you can dive down a political rabbit trail here, and kind of talk about the defunding the police movement, and you look at some of the use of force scenarios that we've seen recently that any law enforcement officer is looking at, and just they're baffled as to how it is that an officer or officers could be involved in some of the things that are going on out there. And it's, as we've been discussing, it really comes to dropping your standards, dropping your expectations, just to get bodies on the street, bodies on the jail floor, just to get the supervisors that you need or the investigators that you need. And we need to, I believe our role is to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to ensure that that isn't happening, that we are putting in the quality, and that we're not substituting quantity for quality. And it's tough. I mean, those are the decisions that you have to make as sometimes as administrators in law enforcement organizations. Do I take a risk? Do I take this person on? Or do I take a risk and put this person on the jail floor or out on the street? Do I put them into investigations? Do I put them on a K-9 unit? Because we need the personnel out there. But to your point, Alex, we've got to stop at some point and say, this is the standard, and if we're not going to meet that, then we are not going to move that person forward. And cutting ties earlier is much better than hoping that person is going to succeed, because the liability is just too great. And we've seen that over the course of the years in our law enforcement profession, what happens when organizations do that, and to the detriment of that law enforcement agency, but more importantly, to the detriment of the community that they serve. So if you were to kind of encourage, because this is, all of the agencies are dealing with this. If you were to encourage an agency or those trainers that are out there working really hard to make sure that these deputies and officers are meeting the standards, what are some of the tips? What are some of the information that we can give them to help them be successful in turning out a product that is going to meet the needs of the organization and meet the needs of the community that they're serving?
I'd say that, and I don't know how often we sit and do it, but each agency just sit and identify maybe what do you want out of your officers before we even start hiring, before we even start, putting through process. What is the bare minimum that we are willing to put out there to wear our badge, to represent our community when they're going out there or dealing with the people in jails or everything, and say what do we need? What do we need from these officers? And understanding the generational side of things, we also need to identify what do these officers need? What generations are coming in? How do they learn? What are they expecting? Because it is definitely we joke about the me generation. Well, it is, but we have to take that on our part. We can't just keep hammer it out the way we did. We have to identify that they are different and that they need certain things. They learn a certain way, and find a way to mix that standard of what we need from an officer and how do we teach these individual folks coming in what our needs are and how to act in those needs appropriately and do those things, and then find a way to combine that, what we need from ourselves, what they need as that individual, because that's what they're looking at. Is we never expected for ourselves. I was like, I never even dreamed about being a supervisor of anything until I've been there 10, 15 years. And now they're walking through the door. Well, how long till I can test for sergeant? But we have to understand that's important to them, that those advancements, those abilities to do those things. So we need to find that mesh of when we're not only teaching them what we expect, to make sure that they understand, or we're meeting the needs of what's important to them and how they can get there. So they're finding how they fit into an agency when they're getting in there. So they know where they're going to, what do they have to do to meet their needs, and how do we have to teach them that. With that combination of things, I think you're going to get ultimately that buy-in from those individuals, because they got to believe in the message from the agency. They got to believe in what the sheriff or chief of police or the community needs, and it's a two-way street. We can't just expect to throw at them, you need to do this, this, and this. So what do you need, so that combination, that they're not working there a year or 2 years, and then what do we see? They hop to the next agency. They go to someplace else, because in their minds, we didn't meet their needs. If they're happy, it's not going to be necessarily the pay. It's not going to be the type of car they're driving or the type of uniform they're wearing. If they feel like the things that they're expecting in life, out of their job and everything, are being met somehow by an agency, their chances of staying there are going to be a lot better. But with that, we have to have a discipline, and we have to maintain discipline. We cannot bend the fact that things need to get done a certain way, that their actions, the way they present themselves, are going to be expected a certain way, that their uniforms are going to be a certain way. You have to have those, keep those standards at that, whatever that level you ultimately decide you need it at, and find a way to bring them up to that. And if they're not willing to get there, be willing to cut some ties. And you have to be willing to fail someone. You have to be able to recognize that you are not a good fit for this agency. I don't care if you're an extra body. I'd rather work with 6 that are going to go out and do the job and that aren't going to be a liability to the agency or a liability to the community than working with 10 where you have to worry about 4 of them all the time. And you worry about whether those 4 are going to be the next, George Floyd incident, or the next, incident out of Tennessee, or one of those things, that they're going to be those people. And it really has to get started off immediately. I mean, once you hire them, setting that in the academy, as they go to the FTO program in a jail or a patrol or detentions, those standards need to be set immediately. And while we can't necessarily tell them they're lower than dirt, we do need to make sure that they understand that there is a certain level and you have to earn something.
I think there's some pride that comes with that as well. If you establish that early on in the hiring process, that, yeah, more is going to be expected of you. But with that comes accomplishment as well. There was pride when we did more with less. And that built the bond of your shift, your platoon, the agency, ultimately. Everybody wants to be part of a winning team. But when you're an underdog and you're still winning, then there's a lot of pride that comes with that. And I think having those standards early on and being transparent that this is what's expected of you if you want to be part of our team, and building upon that from there. Because you might weed some of those people out early on. Say, hey, we're going to look the other way if you were doing drugs within the past couple of years. There's still a lot of people that don't partake in that, and they want to be part of, I wouldn't say more elite, but a stricter foundation, a more disciplined foundation. And if you start there and continue to build upon it, then you don't have that shock factor 6 weeks in and people like, okay, I got punched in the nose for the first time. This isn't what I signed up for. Well, I'd rather weed them out for them and for the agency's sake early on. So yeah, you're going to get punched in the face, and that's okay. There's some fun that comes with that too. You know, it's not the worst thing in the world, unless you're in a fight for your life, and then it could be.
Right.
So early on standards and being flexible from an administrative standpoint as well, understanding that there is really good resources with this younger generation. They're going to be able to respond to like-minded folks on calls better than we did. We were reading body language and eye contact, things like that, whereas it seems now what I would perceive as potentially suspicious activity is lack of human interaction.
Right.
And they could identify with that a lot better. So we can also in turn learn from this younger generation that we've coined it today, and being flexible, ebb and flow through the process, and finding that ultimately the balance that works for the agency.
With that new generation in our workforce, and really, that is our future. What are some of the things that you've seen, Casey, over with your team, trying to get them to come together as a high performing work team, but also to really kind of learn the ropes and the things that they need to know as investigators?
I'm pushing, that teamwork, and it starts at the top. So it involves the commander, it involves the sergeants, the FTOs, and then the detectives. The sergeants really need to be involved with their people on a daily basis, a continual basis, throughout the day to make sure they're going in the direction we want them to go. Put out the fires that we need to put out. To me, I've raised kids too, and my son has always asked me, why, Dad, and these recruits, these newer detectives in their new spot, that's the question they have, why, right? Being in investigations a long time now, I'll refer to paperwork because that's what we do, but a simple form, patrol may not understand why we're filling this form out. They don't understand that not only does the detective use it for data entry or putting the case file together, that the district attorneys use it, and so they're thinking this form may be just repetitive work that admin wants us to do. We have to answer those questions of why, and we also have to be humble and know that I may not know the answer to that why, but who does? And as an FTO, as a mentor, as a sergeant, as a commander, if we don't know those answers, we need to go, I don't know, but let's go ask Alex. He knows. This is his field. This is where he's an expert, and let's get the answer from him. And applying all that into the training these officers, their knowledge builds up, which their confidence builds up, and then they perform at a higher level.
I think you bring up a significant point with the why, and I see it all the time, and I see, because we grew up in a generation where you didn't ask that question. Even when we were raised, you didn't ask mom and dad why, because you would get the message very, very early on as a toddler, as a kid growing up, that it because I told you, and that's kind of the end of the conversation. And then you go into the military, it's kind of the same way, right? You just don't ask why. And I've noticed a lot in law enforcement that exact same thing that you're talking about. This new generation ask why a lot. And I think that one of the barriers that creates, as some of the supervisors take that as kind of they're questioning their authority, and instead of taking it as questioning their authority, it's if I give the person the why, they're going to be able to perform their job at a higher level. And we have to shift that narrative and that thinking with our trainers, that this is something that is important for them to understand the why in something. And most of the time, if we decide that we want to move in a certain direction, or are very passionate about it, it's because we've answered that question for ourselves. We know the why in that. We know why we're pushing so hard. We know why we want to accomplish this or accomplish that. So when the new generation asks that question, we should embrace that as an opportunity, as kind of one of those teachable moments or those coaching moments, and be thoughtful. And if we don't know the question or the answer to the question, find out what that is so that we can start building. And in Casey, you kind of hit it. We start building that confidence in them, and that there's a snowball effect with confidence, just like there's a snowball effect with negativity. But you get confidence, you get positivity moving forward, it too is contagious. And I think that that's really where we want to start pushing our trainers.
Absolutely, and like Casey said, it's one of those whys, is one of those things you identify as that's the desire of this new generation, and that should be built into where we're willing to bend on our side. Is that should be built into our program, that is the why, that our sergeants, when they ask a why, will answer that. And heck, you can read it in a memo in a briefing book. You can have a sergeant tell you, but from the top, stepping in a briefing, going, here, hey, here's this and here's why, folks. How much does that go to that new guy that doesn't know you from anything? Goes, well, if they're coming in and willing to talk to us why, and okay, I get it. It is going to build it. And if we bend in those areas on our end, is it dropping our standard? No, it's just adapting the way we're delivering our message. It's adapting the way that we're getting their buy-in, and we're getting those things that we need and want out of these people into something they can understand, so that they can process in their own minds and be willing to get in with that program. And as you said, it snowballs when it just becomes the daily thing, and that's just our standard is that excellence, and our standard is fight it every day. It's just going to be ingrained, and that's what we do. That's how we do it.
Right.
And I know when I'm going to ask a question as a young cop, I'm going to get an answer why. So I'm going to understand it. I'm going to be a little better for knowing why.
And there's a large chance that other people have that question. So you've provided education to one person, answered a question. Now they have the knowledge to where they're with their peers in the training scenario or in the squad room at the end of shift, and someone saying, well, we're doing this stupid form again for detectives. Oh, well, we're doing it because of this. And that's pure knowledge being passed on. So you might be explaining it to one person, but then that also can fan out through amongst the ranks as well, and answer questions, putting those away before they come to you.
Yeah, when it's trickling from all the levels, including your peers,
Right.
makes it a lot easier to just accept things and
And it helps
with
with that
that
buy-in
program.
as well too. It's not, oh, uppers telling us to do this. That's another thing we have to do. Well, here's the reason.
Well, and I think that buy-in is also one of those other very key components. I've noticed that throughout my career, if you involve people in something that you're trying to accomplish at the beginning and have those conversations, and get them to buy into that, the likelihood of that program being successful and really being kind of led by those that now understand and have that buy-in, it's amazing what you can get done and how far you can move that needle with that group to move in a direction that you really need. And so what I'm hearing is a lot of it is we need to be looking for ways. We need to be adjusting and be flexible in the way that we approach this new generation, not just in the FTO program, but in selection processes for other units, and for other programs that we might want to incorporate within our organization. Really, if we get the buy-in, we answer the question whys that come up. We start to develop champions within the organization, and we also start to develop those informal leaders that will be the mentors and before they even get crusty, but really are the ones that are on the shift, that are doing it right, that have a passion to do it right, and that others are starting to look to and say, that's the way I want to do my job. Those are the accomplishments that I want to make as a deputy before I move on to sergeant or to an investigator or another specific specialty role within an organization.
Yeah, I think that really sums up the whole topic. Really, is we just got to be flexible in our approach, just not flexible in our standards and expectations, and find that balance to be able to do that. And that's the problem, is the standards end up dropping with the change in approach and the change in our tactics of doing stuff. And you just need to make sure that one is not dropping the other.
Right. Yeah, I think that's well put. It's let's not drop the standards. Let's look for ways that we can enhance and learn how to work with and train the new generation. Well, thanks to all of you for being here and kind of talking about this very difficult topic. We just scratched the surface on this. There's so much more out there, but truly want to spark that conversation. Want folks to realize that, especially if we're in a position of leadership, that it really is incumbent upon us to make sure that we are properly training our employees, that we're not dropping our standards, and that we're looking for new ways to deal with the training or the problem solving with this new generation, and also understanding that truly they are the ones that are going to take our profession forward into the future. So again, thank you all for being here. That's all for this week's episode of the Elevate Your Call to Service podcast. Follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. We invite you to visit our website at leleaders.com for our free guide, 10 questions to consider before putting in for your next promotion.